The air in Millstone Hollow carried a crisp coolness that night, a perfect contrast to the warmth radiating from the barn where Abigail Porter and Samuel Porter's wedding reception was in full swing. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a soft, golden glow over the joyous scene. Guests danced, laughed, and toasted the newlyweds, their merriment echoing into the night. Abigail, radiant in her white gown, had been the center of it all, her laughter blending seamlessly with the upbeat chatter. As the evening wore on, Abigail excused herself, slipping quietly through the barn doors. She told no one where she was going, though a few guests noticed her stepping into the open field that stretched toward the woods. It seemed harmless enough. Everyone knew Abigail was prone to seeking moments of quiet reflection, especially after an emotional day. Her absence went unnoticed for some time, as the music and festivities continued uninterrupted. It wasn't until much later, when the band began packing up and the crowd thinned, that Samuel began looking for his bride. His initial search was casual, checking the upstairs loft, the small garden behind the barn, and even the stables nearby. But as the minutes ticked by, his calls for her went unanswered, and a faint unease began to settle over him. He retraced his steps to the barn entrance and noticed something he hadn't before. Abigail's bouquet lay discarded near the path leading to the woods. Its arrangement was slightly askew, as though it had been dropped in haste. Samuel alerted a few remaining guests, and what began as a mild concern quickly spiraled into panic. Within the hour, a dozen villagers, armed with lanterns and flashlights, had gathered at the edge of the woods. The group moved methodically, calling Abigail's name as they combed through the dense trees and underbrush. The soft earth of the woods bore no obvious signs of a struggle, and yet a strange sense of foreboding lingered. The search party soon came upon her phone, shattered and half buried under a rock near the riverbank. This discovery deepened the mystery. Abigail wasn't the type to be careless, and her phone, which she always kept close, would never have been left behind without reason. Nearby, one of her pearl earrings glinted faintly in the light of a lantern, lying in the grass as though it had fallen during a hurried movement. As the night stretched into early morning, the villagers began to realize that Abigail was not simply lost. The evidence, while sparse, painted a chilling picture. The phone, the earring, and the bouquet suggested that something had interrupted her peaceful departure from the barn. Yet the trail went cold abruptly, as if Abigail had vanished into thin air. Thomas Green, a retired park ranger who had joined the search, suggested the group widen their search to include the abandoned well at the edge of the woods. The well, a relic from the village's past, was shrouded in superstition. It had been sealed off years ago, deemed unsafe after an accident involving a child. Despite its infamy, the well was in close proximity to the river, making it a logical point of interest. When the search party reached the well, they found its cover intact but dusted with fresh scuff marks. One of the villagers spotted a torn piece of fabric caught on a nearby bramble, white, delicate, and unmistakably part of Abigail's wedding dress. The discovery sent a wave of dread through the group. Thomas inspected the well closely, his flashlight revealing the slick, moss-covered walls descending into darkness. Though no immediate evidence of Abigail's presence was visible, the well seemed to emanate an unspoken menace. By dawn, the search was suspended, the villagers retreating to their homes in exhausted silence. News of Abigail's disappearance spread quickly, and by mid-morning, the local authorities had arrived to take over the investigation. Sheriff Donovan, a stern but fair man with years of experience, began his preliminary assessment, collecting statements from guests and inspecting the items found near the river. The entire village was now gripped by fear and speculation. Millstone Hollow was a place where everyone knew each other, where crime was rare, and the notion of malice felt almost alien. Yet Abigail's sudden disappearance hinted at something darker lurking beneath the surface. As the authorities launched a full-scale investigation, the villagers could only hope that Abigail would be found safe. But the mounting evidence suggested otherwise, and the serene countryside of Millstone Hollow felt irrevocably altered by the shadow of suspicion that now hung over it. The barn, which had been alive with celebration only hours before, now stood silent and empty. Abigail's absence was palpable, her laughter and presence a void that could not be filled. As the village braced itself for what lay ahead, one thing became clear. This was no ordinary disappearance, and the truth, when it emerged, would change Millstone Hollow forever. Millstone Hollow, with its idyllic fields and stone cottages, had always been a haven of tranquility. Its charm lay in its simplicity, a place where everyone greeted each other by name, where children played freely in the meadows, and where stories of past generations echoed in the whispers of the wind. But as news of Abigail Porter's disappearance spread, a palpable unease settled over the village, its peaceful veneer giving way to suspicion and fear. Abigail had been a beloved figure in Millstone Hollow. As the village's sole midwife, she had delivered dozens of babies, earning the trust and admiration of families across the community. Her warm demeanor and unwavering dedication had made her an anchor in the lives of many. That made her sudden vanishing even more incomprehensible. Who could harm someone like Abigail? And why? Samuel Porter, her husband of less than a day, had become the immediate focus of whispers. Though a skilled blacksmith known for his quiet efficiency, Samuel's reserved nature often set him apart from the more sociable villagers. He was not unkind, but his stoicism was frequently mistaken for aloofness. In the wake of Abigail's disappearance, his demeanor drew even greater scrutiny. His insistence that their marriage had been perfectly fine rang hollow to those who had observed tension between the couple in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Some recalled Abigail's subtle expressions of unease during conversations about her future with Samuel, though she never voiced any specific concerns. As the investigation unfolded, Samuel's actions in the hours before Abigail's disappearance were dissected in painstaking detail. Witnesses at the wedding recalled seeing him engaged in a heated discussion with Naomi Grant, a seamstress who had recently returned to the village after years away. Naomi had been a close friend of Samuel's during their youth, and rumors of a romantic connection between them had circulated long before Abigail entered the picture. Her return had reignited old speculations, especially when she began visiting Samuel's forge under the guise of commissioning metalwork for her cottage. Some villagers whispered that Abigail had been less than thrilled about these interactions, though she had kept her feelings private. Naomi's reclusive nature only fueled suspicions. She lived alone in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of the village, rarely participating in community events. Her reasons for returning to Millstone Hollow were vague, with explanations ranging from seeking a simpler life to needing a fresh start. Whatever the truth, her presence at the wedding had been met with raised eyebrows, especially when she lingered near the barn entrance as Abigail stepped outside for air. Naomi claimed to have left shortly afterward, but no one could corroborate her alibi. Adding to the mystery were the observations of Thomas Green, a retired park ranger who lived near the woods. Thomas, known for his sharp eye and methodical nature, had joined the search party that night. He reported seeing a faint light moving through the trees near the old well, a detail that aligned with the discovery of the torn wedding dress fabric. While Thomas initially believed it to be part of the search effort, the timing suggested otherwise. His account raised unsettling questions. Was someone else in the woods that night? And if so, what were they doing? The physical evidence found thus far only deepened the enigma. The shattered phone indicated force but lacked any fingerprints or DNA traces. The pearl earring and bouquet appeared to have been dropped intentionally, as though marking a trail, yet there were no signs of a struggle nearby. The faint blood trail leading to the riverbank abruptly vanished, as if deliberately cleaned or obscured. Investigators were baffled by the absence of clear clues, a rarity in cases involving potential foul play. Forensic experts scoured the area for additional evidence, focusing on the well and its surroundings. The well, long sealed off due to safety concerns, showed no immediate signs of tampering. However, traces of disturbed earth nearby suggested recent activity. A broken lantern was discovered near the site, its glass shattered and its handle engraved with Samuel's initials. Samuel insisted the lantern had been stolen from his workshop weeks earlier, but the timing of its appearance cast a shadow of doubt over his claims. Naomi, too, came under closer scrutiny when a villager recalled seeing her purchase gloves and cleaning supplies at a nearby general store earlier that week. Her explanation, that she needed them for routine chores, seemed plausible but not entirely convincing, given the circumstances. Her avoidance of search efforts and her reluctance to speak with authorities further raised suspicions. When questioned, Naomi became defensive, accusing the villagers of singling her out unfairly due to her past relationship with Samuel. She maintained her innocence, insisting she had no involvement in Abigail's disappearance. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in Millstone Hollow grew increasingly tense. The villagers, once united in their efforts to find Abigail, began to splinter into factions. Some supported Samuel, believing his grief was genuine and that he was being unfairly vilified. Others sided with Naomi, arguing that her past should not be used to condemn her without proof. A smaller group suspected both of them, theorizing that their unresolved history had somehow culminated in tragedy. Meanwhile, a handful of villagers, including Thomas Green, remained neutral, focusing solely on uncovering the truth. The authorities intensified their efforts, bringing in specialized search teams and forensic experts to re-examine the evidence. The well was drained, revealing nothing of significance, but the process unearthed small fragments of glass and metal that hinted at a possible secondary crime scene. Soil samples from the area were sent for analysis, with results pending. Abigail's disappearance had transformed Millstone Hollow from a peaceful village into a hotbed of suspicion and speculation. Every glance, every word, every action was scrutinized for hidden meaning. The once harmonious community was now fractured, its members grappling with the possibility that one of their own was capable of something unthinkable. Despite the lack of definitive answers, one thing was certain: Abigail's absence was no accident. The mystery surrounding her vanishing was far more intricate than anyone had anticipated, and the truth, when it finally surfaced, would undoubtedly shake Millstone Hollow to its core. The night of Abigail's disappearance was replayed in the minds of Millstone Hollow's villagers and investigators over and over. The timeline of events seemed straightforward at first, yet every attempt to piece together the details led to more questions than answers. What should have been a joyous evening turned into a maze of fragmented memories, inconsistent accounts, and eerie coincidences. The reception had been vibrant, filled with laughter and music, a rare spectacle in the otherwise quiet village. Abigail had been radiant in her flowing white dress, her genuine smile reflecting the happiness shared by all who attended. Guests remembered her flitting between tables, thanking them for coming, before stepping outside to get some air. It seemed so innocuous at the time, a bride savoring a private moment on her wedding night. No one imagined it would be the last time they saw her. The accounts of her departure varied in subtle but significant ways. One guest claimed to have seen Abigail leave the barn and turn toward the riverbank. Another swore she had walked in the opposite direction, toward the woods. A third guest noted that Naomi Grant had also stepped outside around the same time, a detail that seemed innocuous until later. The discrepancies in these statements left investigators with no clear path to follow. By the time Samuel noticed Abigail's absence, the reception was winding down. Most of the guests had gone, the barn now quiet except for the scraping of chairs being stacked and the low hum of conversation among the remaining few. Samuel's initial search of the barn and its surroundings yielded nothing, but his discovery of Abigail's bouquet near the path leading to the woods sent a chill through him. The trail of evidence that followed, the phone, the pearl earring, and the faint smears of blood, hinted at something more sinister. Yet the clues ended abruptly, as though they had been deliberately erased. The search that night was both thorough and chaotic. Villagers armed with lanterns and flashlights fanned out across the woods, calling Abigail's name into the darkness. The uneven terrain and dense foliage made progress slow, and the riverbank, with its steep edges and slippery stones, was particularly treacherous. Thomas Green, the retired park ranger, took the lead, his years of experience in wilderness navigation proving invaluable. He directed searchers to areas that were easily overlooked: overgrown trails, hollowed tree trunks, and the old well that had long been sealed off for safety. It was here that the first significant clue was found: a torn piece of Abigail's wedding dress caught on a bramble near the well. The well itself became a focal point of the investigation. Though its cover appeared intact, the fresh scuff marks around its edges suggested recent disturbance. The discovery of the broken lantern nearby added to the growing sense of unease. Samuel's initials etched into the lantern's handle made it an object of immediate interest. When questioned about it, Samuel insisted the lantern had been stolen from his workshop weeks earlier, but he couldn't explain why he hadn't reported it missing. While the villagers focused on the woods and riverbank, The authorities expanded their search to the surrounding fields and roads. A faint set of tire tracks was discovered on a dirt road leading out of the village, though it was impossible to determine when they had been made or if they were connected to Abigail's disappearance. The tracks led toward a disused logging trail, a route that hadn't been traveled in years. Forensic teams were called in to examine the area, but the results were inconclusive. In the days that followed, new details began to emerge, adding further layers to the mystery. Surveillance footage from a gas station on the edge of the village showed Naomi Grant's car leaving Millstone Hollow around midnight, a fact she had not disclosed during her initial questioning. Naomi claimed she had gone for a drive to clear her head, a habit she often indulged in when feeling overwhelmed. While plausible, her explanation did little to dispel the growing suspicion surrounding her. Samuel's behavior also drew scrutiny. Those who spoke to him described his demeanor as erratic, alternating between visible distress and defensive hostility. He repeatedly denied any involvement in Abigail's disappearance, but admitted their relationship had been strained in the weeks leading up to the wedding. He insisted that their arguments had been minor, nothing that could have led to violence, but investigators weren't convinced. His reluctance to discuss certain aspects of his past, particularly his prior relationship with Naomi, only fueled doubts about his innocence. As the investigation progressed, the village itself seemed to change. The once close-knit community became fractured, divided by whispers and suspicions. Neighbors who had known each other for decades began looking at one another with distrust. Theories about Abigail's fate ranged from plausible to outlandish. Some believed she had been abducted by a stranger passing through the village, while others speculated that she had run away to escape the pressures of her new marriage. A few even suggested supernatural causes, citing the legends surrounding the old well and the supposed curse that plagued the land around it. Through it all, one question remained unanswered. Where was Abigail? The evidence, while intriguing, provided no clear answers. The smashed phone and the blood trail pointed to foul play, but there was no body, no witnesses, and no confession. The investigation seemed to hit a wall, each clue leading to more questions rather than answers. For the villagers of Millstone Hollow, the uncertainty was unbearable. The thought that someone among them might be responsible for Abigail's disappearance cast a long shadow over the once idyllic community. The authorities, too, struggled to make progress. Every potential lead seemed to evaporate upon closer inspection. The broken lantern, while suspicious, yielded no fingerprints. The torn dress fabric provided no additional insights, and the tire tracks on the logging trail proved impossible to trace. Investigators began to suspect that whoever was responsible for Abigail's disappearance had taken deliberate steps to obscure their tracks, leaving only enough evidence to mislead and confuse. As the days turned into weeks, hope began to wane. The search parties dwindled and the villagers returned to their routines, though the weight of Abigail's absence lingered. For Samuel, the loss was unbearable. He spent his days answering questions from investigators, his nights consumed by the memory of his wife's laughter and the haunting silence she left behind. For Naomi, the scrutiny became suffocating, her every move watched and questioned by a community that had already decided she was guilty. And for Thomas Green, the mystery of what he had seen that night, the faint light moving through the woods, the broken lantern, the scuffed earth around the well, remained a puzzle he couldn't shake. The truth about what happened to Abigail Porter was out there, hidden in the shadows of Millstone Hollow. But uncovering it would require untangling a web of lies, secrets, and half-truths, a task that grew more daunting with each passing day. The investigation into Abigail Porter's disappearance seemed to deepen with every passing day, the scattered fragments of evidence forming a puzzle that refused to come together. While the villagers clung to the hope of finding her alive, the authorities grew increasingly certain that they were not dealing with a simple case of a bride who had wandered off or fled in the heat of the moment. The faint blood trail, the torn wedding dress, the shattered phone, all pointed to something far more sinister. Despite exhaustive efforts, the search yielded no sign of Abigail herself. The well, initially a focal point of the investigation, was thoroughly drained and inspected. But apart from the torn fabric found near its edge and fragments of a broken lantern, it held no answers. The lantern, engraved with Samuel Porter's initials, became a key piece of evidence. though its significance remained frustratingly ambiguous. Samuel continued to insist it had been stolen from his workshop weeks earlier, yet no report of the theft had ever been made. Investigators couldn't determine whether it had been used in an accident or as part of a deliberate act. Naomi Grant's actions drew even more suspicion. Her late-night drive, captured on surveillance footage, became a focal point for questioning. She claimed to have felt overwhelmed after the wedding and had driven to a neighboring town to clear her head. Yet inconsistencies in her story raised red flags. The timing of her departure from Millstone Hollow and her return didn't align with her explanation. Receipts from a gas station where she had refueled showed she had purchased gloves and a small can of kerosene. Naomi dismissed the purchase as routine, but the implications were difficult to ignore. As investigators began digging into her background, more troubling details emerged. Naomi's return to Millstone Hollow had been shrouded in mystery. She had spent years away, moving from town to town, and her reasons for coming back were vague at best. A neighbor recalled that Naomi's behavior in the weeks leading up to the wedding had been odd. She had been seen walking near Samuel's workshop on multiple occasions, though she had no apparent reason to be there. Another villager claimed to have overheard a tense conversation between Naomi and Samuel a week before the wedding, though the details were unclear. Forensic analysis of the torn wedding dress fabric revealed faint traces of kerosene, a discovery that further complicated the case. Investigators theorized that the accelerant might have been used to destroy evidence, though there was no sign of a fire at any of the known locations. The soil samples collected from the riverbank, the woods, and the area around the well were analyzed for traces of kerosene or other chemical residues, but the results were inconclusive. Meanwhile, Samuel's behavior became increasingly erratic. Under the weight of suspicion, he withdrew from the community, spending long hours in his workshop with the doors locked. His responses to questioning grew defensive, even hostile, as investigators pressed him about his relationship with Abigail and his past connection to Naomi. Samuel admitted that Naomi had reached out to him shortly after returning to the village, but insisted that their interactions had been platonic. However, when asked why he hadn't informed Abigail about these meetings, he offered no clear answer. The pressure on Samuel intensified when forensic teams discovered partial fingerprints on the broken lantern. The prints were too smudged to identify conclusively, but they were consistent with Samuel's, further tying him to the scene. Though not damning on their own, the fingerprints added to the mounting circumstantial evidence against him. Investigators began to focus on the possibility that Samuel and Naomi had conspired together, their shared history providing a motive for removing Abigail from the picture. The villagers, once united in their efforts to find Abigail, began to splinter into factions. Some believed Samuel was innocent, a devoted husband caught in a web of misunderstandings. Others were convinced he was hiding something, his stoic demeanor masking a darker side. Naomi, too, became a subject of heated debate. While some saw her as an easy scapegoat, others pointed to her peculiar behavior and suspicious actions as undeniable evidence of guilt. The divisions within the community mirrored the fractured progress of the investigation. A breakthrough came when Thomas Green, the retired park ranger, decided to re-examine the area around the well on his own. While searching a nearby hollow, he stumbled upon a pile of burnt debris partially buried under leaves and soil. Among the charred remains were fragments of cloth, buttons that matched the design of Abigail's wedding dress, and a melted plastic hair comb. The discovery was immediately reported to the authorities, who cordoned off the area for further investigation. The hollow, hidden from view by dense underbrush, appeared to have been used as a makeshift burn site. Forensic analysis of the debris revealed traces of blood that matched Abigail's DNA, confirming that the site was connected to her disappearance. The presence of kerosene residue in the soil further supported the theory that someone had attempted to destroy evidence. The timing of the burn was difficult to determine, but investigators believed it had occurred shortly after Abigail's disappearance. The discovery of the burn site added a new layer of complexity to the case. If Abigail had been taken to the woods and her belongings burned, where was her body? The absence of a body made it difficult to determine whether Abigail was still alive or if she had met a more sinister fate. The possibility that she had been moved to another location could not be ruled out, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. As the investigation progressed, it became increasingly clear that the truth was buried beneath layers of deception and misdirection. Naomi's purchases of gloves and kerosene, the broken lantern bearing Samuel's initials, the torn dress fabric, and the burned site all pointed to a calculated effort to obscure the events of that fateful night. Yet the lack of direct evidence or a clear motive left the case teetering on the edge of ambiguity. Millstone Hollow, once a place of simple joys and shared trust, now simmered with tension and mistrust. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret. Every whispered conversation hinted at betrayal. The villagers, weary from weeks of unanswered questions, began to wonder whether the truth about Abigail Porter would ever come to light, or if her disappearance would remain an unsolved mystery, haunting the Hollow for years to come. The investigation into Abigail Porter's disappearance took on a grueling intensity as authorities doubled down on their efforts. The discoveries at the burn site added urgency to their work. Evidence had been destroyed, but the precision of the act implied that whoever was responsible had a methodical approach, raising fears that they were dealing with someone experienced in covering their tracks. The question now was whether this destruction was an act of desperation or part of a carefully orchestrated plan. Forensic teams worked around the clock to extract every possible clue from the burn site. Tiny remnants of cloth and melted plastic told a story of deliberate incineration, while the traces of Abigail's DNA confirmed her presence at the scene. The discovery of kerosene residue matched the earlier findings on the torn fabric and hinted at a disturbing level of premeditation. Despite these breakthroughs, the most crucial piece of the puzzle, Abigail's whereabouts, remained elusive. The focus shifted back to the two key figures at the heart of the investigation: Samuel Porter and Naomi Grant. Both individuals had motives, both had inconsistencies in their stories, and both had connections to the evidence. The case against them was circumstantial but compelling, and investigators believed that one or both of them held the key to solving the mystery. Samuel was subjected to another round of intense questioning. Investigators pressed him on his relationship with Abigail, his alleged theft of the lantern, and his failure to report it missing. Samuel maintained his innocence but grew increasingly agitated as the interrogations wore on. He admitted to arguing with Abigail in the weeks before their wedding, citing her concerns about their future together. He described her as hesitant and claimed she had been under significant stress due to the demands of planning the wedding and her work as a midwife. When asked why he hadn't reported Naomi's recent visits to his workshop, Samuel faltered, his evasive answers fueling further suspicion. Naomi's interrogation was no less intense. Confronted with the surveillance footage showing her late-night drive, she repeated her claim that she had gone to clear her head after feeling overwhelmed by the wedding. When questioned about the kerosene and gloves she had purchased, she insisted they were for household chores, but her defensive demeanor raised doubts. Investigators also pressed her on her interactions with Abigail. Naomi admitted to feeling resentment toward Abigail, describing her as smug and condescending, but she denied having any role in her disappearance. She portrayed herself as a victim of circumstance, unfairly targeted because of her past relationship with Samuel. Meanwhile, Thomas Green's discovery of the burn site opened new lines of inquiry. His detailed account of the faint light he had seen near the well on the night of Abigail's disappearance was revisited, leading investigators to theorize that the light could have been from a lantern used by the perpetrator. The broken lantern found near the well took on greater significance, its presence reinforcing the possibility that the site had been part of a larger effort to stage or obscure the crime. Forensic analysts revisited the torn dress fabric, re-examining it for additional clues. Under ultraviolet light, they detected faint traces of a foreign substance, possibly a cleaning agent, suggesting that someone had attempted to sanitize the area. This discovery tied back to Naomi's purchase of gloves and kerosene, further implicating her in the effort to conceal evidence. Investigators also noted the presence of small, jagged cuts on the fabric, consistent with it being forcibly removed or caught on a sharp object. The investigation expanded to include a detailed analysis of cell phone records. Abigail's phone, though damaged, yielded valuable data about her movements in the hours leading up to her disappearance. GPS coordinates placed her near the woods around the time the reception ended, corroborating witness accounts of her leaving the barn. More intriguingly, her phone showed an incoming call from an unregistered number shortly before it was shattered. Investigators traced the number to a disposable phone purchased in the neighboring town, but the buyer's identity remained unknown. Attention also turned to the tire tracks found on the logging trail. Though weather and time had rendered them faint, forensic specialists managed to determine that they belonged to a mid-sized vehicle. This finding narrowed the list of potential suspects, as only a few villagers owned vehicles that matched the description. One of these vehicles belonged to Naomi. She claimed the tracks were unrelated, stating that she often drove along the trail to reach a secluded spot where she enjoyed sketching landscapes. Her explanation, while plausible, did little to alleviate the growing doubts about her involvement. As the investigation deepened, a pattern began to emerge, one of deliberate misdirection. The broken lantern, the burned debris, the wiped-down fabric, and the scattered evidence all pointed to a calculated effort to obscure the truth. Yet the inconsistencies in Samuel and Naomi's stories suggested that neither of them was working alone. Investigators began exploring the possibility of a third party, someone who might have played a role in orchestrating or assisting with the crime. This theory gained traction when a villager came forward with a startling piece of information. A farmer who lived near the logging trail reported seeing an unfamiliar vehicle parked along the road late on the night of Abigail's disappearance. The car, described as a dark sedan, didn't match the description of any vehicle owned by Samuel or Naomi. The farmer noted that the car's headlights had been off and that it had driven away quickly when he approached. This sighting added a new layer of complexity to the case, raising questions about whether someone from outside the village had been involved. With this new lead, investigators expanded their scope, seeking to identify the owner of the dark sedan. Surveillance footage from nearby gas stations and intersections was reviewed, but the search proved challenging. The rural nature of Millstone Hollow meant there were few cameras, and the roads leading into the village were poorly monitored. Despite these obstacles, authorities remained determined to follow every possible lead. The villagers, too, were swept up in the growing intrigue. The once close-knit community was now divided by suspicion and speculation. Samuel's supporters argued that he was being unfairly targeted due to his reserved nature, while others pointed to his evasive behavior as evidence of guilt. Naomi's defenders claimed she was a scapegoat, a convenient target because of her past with Samuel and her strained relationship with Abigail. Amidst the growing tension, whispers of an outsider's involvement began circulating, adding to the already fraught atmosphere. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation seemed to reach a tipping point. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture, but critical gaps remained. The dark sedan, the disposable phone, the smudged fingerprints on the lantern, all hinted at a larger conspiracy. Whether Samuel, Naomi, or someone else entirely was the mastermind remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. The truth about Abigail's disappearance was more complex than anyone had imagined. The search for Abigail Porter continued, driven by a mix of determination and desperation. For the villagers of Millstone Hollow, her absence was a wound that refused to heal, a constant reminder of the darkness that had invaded their tranquil world. And as the investigation pressed on, the question loomed larger than ever. Who had taken Abigail, and why? The investigation into Abigail Porter's disappearance reached a boiling point as new evidence deepened the mystery and heightened the stakes. Every lead seemed to raise more questions than answers, and the growing tension among the villagers only added to the chaos. What had started as a straightforward search for a missing woman had spiraled into a tangled web of secrets, lies, and chilling discoveries. The dark sedan reported by the farmer near the logging trail became the focal point of the investigation. Authorities combed through surveillance footage from neighboring towns, gas stations, and roadside cameras, eventually identifying a vehicle that matched the description. The car, registered to a man named Elias Carter, stood out immediately. Carter was not a resident of Millstone Hollow, nor did he have any known connections to Abigail or the village. Investigators tracked Carter to a small town 20 miles away, where he worked as a traveling handyman. When questioned, Carter admitted to driving through Millstone Hollow on the night of Abigail's disappearance, but denied any involvement in her case. He claimed he had taken the logging trail as a shortcut, unaware that it was private property. His story seemed plausible, but inconsistencies in his timeline raised suspicions. Moreover, a search of his vehicle revealed faint traces of soil that matched samples from the burn site, though Carter insisted he had never been near the woods. While Carter's connection to the case remained tenuous, investigators couldn't ignore the potential link. They expanded their inquiries into his background, uncovering a history of petty theft and trespassing, but nothing that suggested a capacity for violence. Still, the presence of his car near the logging trail and the matching soil samples placed him firmly in the realm of possibility. The possibility that Carter might have been hired or coerced by someone within the village began to take shape. At the same time, pressure on Naomi Grant intensified. Forensic analysis of her car revealed more damning evidence: a small trace of kerosene on the floor mat and a single strand of fabric that appeared to match Abigail's wedding dress. Naomi denied ever transporting anything related to Abigail and maintained that she had no connection to the burn site. Her defensiveness, coupled with the mounting evidence, only deepened investigators' suspicions. Naomi's timeline for the night of the disappearance also began to crumble. Surveillance footage placed her near the gas station much later than she initially claimed, and receipts showed purchases that didn't align with her story. Investigators pressed her on these discrepancies, but Naomi remained tight-lipped, refusing to provide further explanations. Her silence fueled speculation that she might have been protecting someone or herself. Meanwhile, Samuel Porter's behavior continued to raise red flags. Under renewed questioning, Samuel admitted to an argument with Abigail on the night of the wedding. He described it as a minor disagreement over Naomi's presence at the reception, but investigators were skeptical. Witnesses had reported seeing Samuel and Naomi in a heated exchange earlier that evening, though neither party would disclose the nature of their discussion. When pressed about the broken lantern, Samuel maintained his story that it had been stolen, but his inability to account for its whereabouts during the weeks prior to the wedding cast further doubt on his credibility. Adding to the complexity of the case was a chilling new discovery. A fisherman casting his net near a bend in the river downstream from the village stumbled upon a set of muddy footprints leading from the water's edge to a small clearing. There he found a crumpled piece of paper, partially buried under leaves and debris. The paper appeared to be part of a letter, written in Abigail's handwriting, though much of it was illegible due to water damage. The few decipherable words hinted at distress. "I'm scared, can't trust, and not what he seems." The note, while cryptic, added a new layer of urgency to the investigation. If Abigail had written it shortly before her disappearance, who was she referring to? And why? Forensic teams examined the footprints, determining they belonged to a pair of men's boots. The tread pattern matched a popular brand sold locally, but this did little to narrow down the list of potential suspects. The proximity of the footprints to the riverbank, combined with the discovery of the letter fragment, suggested that Abigail might have tried to escape, or that her captor had taken her there before moving her elsewhere. Either way, the river became a focal point for renewed searches, with divers scouring its depths for any trace of evidence. As the investigation intensified, the fractures within Millstone Hollow's close-knit community became more pronounced. Friends turned on each other, neighbors whispered behind closed doors, and old grudges resurfaced in the wake of the mounting tension. Samuel and Naomi, once tolerated despite their flaws, found themselves ostracized, their reputations tarnished by association with the case. Even Thomas Green, whose discovery of the burn site had propelled the investigation forward, faced scrutiny. Some villagers began questioning his motives, wondering whether his proximity to the well in the woods might indicate a deeper involvement. The authorities, too, were under immense pressure. The longer Abigail remained missing, the more the case attracted attention from outside Millstone Hollow. Media outlets descended on the village, turning its quiet streets into a circus of reporters and camera crews. The coverage brought renewed scrutiny to the investigation, with critics questioning whether local law enforcement was equipped to handle such a complex case. In response, the sheriff's department enlisted the help of state investigators, bringing fresh eyes to the evidence. One of the most significant breakthroughs came during a detailed reanalysis of Abigail's shattered phone. Though much of its data had been corrupted, forensic specialists managed to recover fragments of text messages sent in the hours leading up to her disappearance. The messages revealed a heated exchange between Abigail and an unknown recipient, discussing fears and suspicions about someone close to her. The identity of the recipient remained a mystery, as the number was linked to a disposable phone. However, the content of the messages suggested that Abigail had been deeply troubled and might have been planning to confront someone on the night of the wedding. The discovery of the messages prompted investigators to revisit Abigail's inner circle, focusing on those who might have known about her fears. Samuel, Naomi, and even Thomas were questioned again, but none of them admitted to knowing about the messages or the disposable phone. The revelation added another layer of intrigue to the case, raising the possibility that Abigail had confided in someone outside her immediate circle, someone who might hold the key to unlocking the mystery. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together, the web of lies and half-truths surrounding Abigail's disappearance grew increasingly tangled. Each new discovery brought investigators closer to the truth, but the journey remained fraught with uncertainty. The river, the burned site, the dark sedan, the broken lantern, and the cryptic letter all pointed to a complex and calculated act of deception. Yet the question remained, who was responsible and what had happened to Abigail Porter? The investigation had stretched into weeks, each passing day eroding the hope of finding Abigail alive. Yet the arrival of state investigators infused the case with renewed energy and sharper tools. The villagers of Millstone Hollow watched with a mix of hope and dread as forensic vans and seasoned officers combed their quiet town, determined to unearth the truth. Every detail, every thread, footprint, and fragment of glass was revisited, analyzed, and reinterpreted. And finally, the case began to crack. One of the breakthroughs came from the riverbank, where the cryptic letter fragment was discovered. Forensic teams, using advanced imaging technology, managed to recover more of the letter's contents. It was addressed to no one specifically, but hinted at Abigail's growing fear of betrayal. Phrases like, "I trusted you," and "I thought I knew you," underscored her sense of danger. Most chilling was the final line, barely legible under the water damage. "If I don't make it through tonight, you'll know why." The letter shifted the tone of the investigation. It was no longer just a search for Abigail, but a hunt for her betrayer. The implication was clear. She had been threatened or coerced by someone close to her, and she had anticipated harm. Investigators pressed her family and friends about whether Abigail had confided in them, but none could offer insight into who she might have feared. Samuel and Naomi, predictably, denied knowing about the letter, though both became visibly unsettled when questioned about its contents. Meanwhile, the dark sedan belonging to Elias Carter took on greater significance. Investigators discovered Carter had been hired for odd jobs in the weeks before Abigail's wedding, including one in Millstone Hollow. Witnesses placed him at Naomi Grant's home during this time, where he was seen unloading boxes late at night. Carter initially dismissed the connection as a coincidence, claiming Naomi had hired him to repair a leak in her roof. But when investigators searched Naomi's property, they uncovered a box buried in the garden behind her house. Inside were items that once belonged to Abigail, a hairbrush, a bracelet, and a photograph of her and Samuel on their engagement day. Naomi's reaction to the discovery was immediate and defensive. She accused the investigators of planting evidence, claiming she had no knowledge of the box's existence. But the evidence against her continued to mount. Soil samples from her garden matched those from the burn site near the woods, and fibers consistent with Abigail's wedding dress were found on a pair of gardening gloves in Naomi's shed. The connections were becoming impossible to ignore, but Naomi refused to admit any involvement, insisting she was being framed. Samuel, too, remained under suspicion. The fragments of text messages recovered from Abigail's phone painted a damning picture. One exchange in particular caught investigators' attention. Abigail had written, "You promised this wouldn't happen again," followed by, "I won't stay quiet." While the recipient's identity was still unknown, the context suggested Abigail had confronted someone about a betrayal or wrongdoing. Samuel was questioned extensively about the messages, but he claimed ignorance, his frustration boiling over as he accused investigators of targeting him without evidence. The real breakthrough came when investigators re-examined the burn site. Among the charred remains, they uncovered a small, partially melted locket that had been overlooked during the initial search. The locket contained a photo of Abigail as a child, alongside her late mother. It was a deeply personal item, one that she had worn on her wedding day. The locket was sent for DNA testing, which revealed a surprising result. Faint traces of blood, not from Abigail, but from another individual. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation yet again. The blood, though degraded, was linked to a minor injury reported by Elias Carter weeks earlier, a deep cut on his hand, documented at an urgent care clinic in a nearby town. Confronted with this evidence, Carter's composure crumbled. He admitted to being at the burn site but claimed he had been coerced by Naomi to dispose of the evidence. According to Carter, Naomi had contacted him on the night of the wedding, offering him money to clean up a mess. He insisted he had no knowledge of what had happened to Abigail, only that Naomi had seemed desperate and insistent. Naomi vehemently denied Carter's accusations, calling him a liar and a thief, but her story was unraveling. Investigators uncovered phone records showing multiple calls between Naomi and Carter in the hours after Abigail disappeared. The records also revealed an unregistered number that matched the disposable phone used to contact Abigail shortly before her disappearance. Naomi denied owning the phone, but the evidence painted a damning picture. With this new information, investigators theorized that Abigail had confronted Naomi about her ongoing relationship with Samuel. The confrontation, fueled by jealousy and resentment, had turned violent. In the aftermath, Naomi had enlisted Carter to help cover her tracks, burning evidence and scattering Abigail's belongings to mislead authorities. But the absence of a body left a critical gap in the case. Naomi maintained her innocence, insisting she had no knowledge of Abigail's whereabouts, while Carter claimed he had never seen Abigail alive or dead. As the investigation reached its climax, Millstone Hollow descended into turmoil. The village, already fractured by suspicion and fear, now faced the reality that one of their own had betrayed the trust of the community. Neighbors turned against one another, old wounds were reopened, and the once idyllic village became a place of unease and doubt. Despite the mounting evidence, investigators knew they were missing one crucial piece: Abigail herself. Until her body was found, the case remained incomplete, and the full truth of what had happened that fateful night hung in the balance. The search continued, each discovery bringing them closer to an answer, but the shadows of Millstone Hollow still held secrets that refused to come to light. The discovery of Naomi Grant's connection to Elias Carter had shattered any illusions of innocence that remained. The villagers of Millstone Hollow, once bound by trust and community, now found themselves grappling with the horrifying realization that the answers they sought lay among them all along. Investigators pushed forward relentlessly, determined to uncover the truth and finally locate Abigail Porter. With mounting evidence against Naomi, including Carter's testimony, the case seemed poised to break wide open. Naomi, however, refused to yield. She maintained that Carter was lying to save himself, accusing investigators of orchestrating a narrative to frame her. Her protest grew more frantic as more details came to light. Soil samples, kerosene traces, the hidden box of Abigail's belongings, and her repeated denials all painted a picture of desperation and guilt. But even as the case tightened around her, the most pressing question remained unanswered. Where was Abigail? A team of forensic divers returned to the river one final time, meticulously searching a section further downstream from the initial burn site. It was there, tangled among submerged tree roots, that they found her. Abigail's body was recovered weeks after her disappearance, her wedding dress tattered and stained by the elements. The medical examiner confirmed that Abigail had sustained head trauma consistent with a fall or blunt force impact, along with bruising on her arms that suggested a violent struggle. She had not drowned, but rather had succumbed to her injuries before being placed in the water. The revelation brought a somber closure to the search for Abigail. Investigators confronted Naomi with the autopsy findings, the recovered belongings, and Carter's testimony. Under the weight of overwhelming evidence, Naomi broke down. She admitted to confronting Abigail near the woods that night, overcome by jealousy and anger. The argument had turned physical, and in the chaos, Naomi had struck Abigail with a rock. Panicked and unable to think clearly, Naomi enlisted Carter to help dispose of the evidence, leading to the elaborate cover-up. Naomi was charged with second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. Elias Carter, though complicit in the disposal of evidence, cooperated fully with investigators, and received a reduced sentence for his role in the crime. For Samuel, the outcome was both a relief and a devastation. Though cleared of direct involvement, his failure to address the tensions between Abigail and Naomi, as well as his own ambiguous behavior, left him ostracized by many in the village. He eventually left Millstone Hollow, unable to bear the weight of the tragedy. Abigail's death sent shockwaves through Millstone Hollow, leaving a scar that would take years to heal. Her loss was felt not only by those who knew her, but by the entire community, which was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about jealousy, anger, and the fragility of trust. The once idyllic village became a cautionary tale, a reminder that darkness could exist even in the most seemingly peaceful places. The tragedy brought to light the dangers of unresolved emotions and unchecked resentments. Naomi's jealousy, born from a past she could not let go of, had spiraled into violence. Samuel's failure to acknowledge the complexities of his relationships and his unwillingness to communicate openly had allowed tensions to fester. Abigail, though kind and giving, had borne her fears in silence, leaving those closest to her unaware of the danger she felt. Millstone Hollow became a quieter place in the aftermath, its residents more reserved and cautious. Yet from the tragedy, there emerged a sense of purpose. Abigail's memory was honored with a community garden near the village clinic where she had worked. The garden became a place of reflection, a symbol of resilience and renewal. Villagers gathered there not only to mourn, but to remind themselves of the value of kindness, understanding, and vigilance. Abigail's story serves as a stark reminder that the threads of human connection, trust, love, and honesty, are both delicate and vital. When those threads fray, the consequences can be devastating. The tragedy of Millstone Hollow underscored the importance of addressing conflicts before they spiral out of control, of speaking up when something feels wrong, and of fostering a community where people feel safe to share their burdens. For those who followed the case, the lessons were clear. Jealousy and resentment, if left unchecked, could lead to ruin. Silence and avoidance allowed problems to fester, turning minor grievances into tragedies. And, most importantly, the cost of ignoring warning signs could be the loss of a life, a lesson that Abigail's story taught in the most painful way possible. As the seasons passed, Millstone Hollow began to heal. New families moved in, children played in the fields again, and life slowly returned to its rhythms. But the memory of Abigail Porter remained a part of the village's fabric, a reminder of the shadows that had once loomed and the light that could emerge even from the darkest of nights. The story has been edited to ensure personal privacy and security regarding names and locations. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe to see the latest and most thrilling family crime stories. Don't miss tomorrow's case where everything will be revealed.